Chapter 12 Nowhere House. Momo was standing in the biggest room she had ever seen. It was bigger than the biggest cathedral or concert hall in the world. Massive columns supported a roof that could be sensed rather than seen in the gloom far above. There were no windows anywhere. The golden light that wove its way across this immense hall came from countless candles whose flames burned so steadily that they looked like daubs of brilliant paint requiring no wax at all to keep them alight. The thousandfold whirring and ticking and humming and chimming that Momo had heard on entering came from innumerable clocks of every shape and size. They reposed on long tables, in glass cabinets, on golden wall brackets, on endless rows of shelves. There were dainty, bejeweled pocket watches, cheap tin alarm clocks, hourglasses, musical clocks with pirouetting dolls on top, sundials, clocks encased in wood and marble, glass clocks, and clocks driven by jets of water. On the walls hung all manner of cuckoo clocks and other clocks with ways and pendulums, some swinging slowly and majestically, others wagging busily to and fro. All around the room, at first floor level, ran a gallery reached by a spiral staircase. Higher still was another gallery, and above it another, and above that yet another. Clocks were standing or hanging wherever Momo looked. Not only conventional clocks, but spherical timepieces showing what time it was anywhere in the world, and sidereal clocks, large and small, complete with sun, moon, and stars. Arrayed in the middle of the hall were countless bigger clocks, a forest of clocks, as it were, ranging from grandfather clocks to full-size church clocks. Not a moment passed, but one of these innumerable timepieces struck or chimed somewhere or other, for each of them showed a different time. Far from offending the ear, they combined to produce a sound as pleasant and harmonious as the rustle of leaves in a wood in springtime. Momo roamed from place to place, gazing wide-eyed at all these curiosities. She had paused beside a lavishly ornamented clock on which two tiny dancers, a man and a woman, were standing with hands entwined, and was just about to prod them to see if they would move, when she heard a friendly voice behind her. "Ah, so you're back, Cassiopeia," it said. "Did you bring Momo with you?" Turning, Momo looked along an avenue between the grandfather clocks and saw a frail old man with silvery hair stooping over the tortoise. He was wearing a gold-embroidered frock coat, blue silk knee breeches, white hose, and shoes with big gold buckles. Lace frosted from the cuffs and collar of his coat, and his silver hair was braided into a pigtail at the back. Momo had never seen such a costume before, though anyone less ignorant would at once have recognized it as the height of fashion or 2 centuries earlier. "Well," said the old gentleman, still bending over the tortoise, "is she here? Where is she, then?" He donned a small pair of eyeglasses, like old Beppo's, except that these were gold-rimmed, and peered about him. "Here I am," called Momo. The old gentleman came towards her with a beaming smile, both hands extended, and the nearer he drew, the younger he seemed to become. By the time he had reached Momo's side, seized her hands and shaken them cordially, he looked little older than herself. "Welcome," he said delightedly. "Welcome to Nowhere House. Permit me to introduce myself, Momo. My name is Hora, Professor Secundus Minutus Hora." "Were you really expecting me?" Momo asked in surprise. "But of course, why else would I have sent Cassiopeia to fetch you?" He produced a diamond-studded fob watch from his pocket and flipped the lid open. "In fact, you're uncommonly punctual," he said with a smile, holding out the watch for her inspection. There were no hands or numerals on the watch face, Momo saw, just two very fine superimposed spirals rotating slowly in opposite directions. Every now and then, minute dots of light appeared where the spirals intersected. "This watch," said Professor Hora, "is known as a crismograph. It accurately records crises in the history of mankind, and one of these rare occurrences has just begun." "What's a crisis?" asked Momo. "It's like this," the professor explained. "At certain junctures in the course of existence, unique moments occur. When everyone and everything, even the most distant stars, combine to bring about something that could not have happened before and will never happen again. Few people know how to take advantage of these critical moments, unfortunately, and they often pass unnoticed. When someone does recognize them, however, great things happen in the world. Perhaps one needs a watch like yours to recognize them by," said Momo. Professor Hora smiled and shook his head. "No, my child, the watch by itself would be no use to anyone. You have to know how to read it as well." He snapped the watch shut and replaced it in his pocket. Then, noticing Momo's ill-concealed surprise at his personal appearance, he looked down at himself and frowned. "Ah," he said, "you may be punctual, but I seem to be rather behind the times. In fashion, I mean. How unobservant of me. I must put that right at once." And he clicked his fingers. In a flash, his costume changed to a black frock coat, stovepipe trousers, and a stand-up collar. "Is that any better?" he inquired doubtfully, but Momo's look of astonishment was answer enough in itself. "No, of course not," he went on quickly. "What am I thinking of?" Another click of the fingers, and he instantly appeared in an outfit the like of which Momo had never seen, nor had anyone else, since it dated from 100 years in the future. "Still no good?" he asked. "Never mind, I'll get it right in the end," and he clicked his fingers a third time. At long last, he stood there, attired in an ordinary suit of the kind men wear today. "That's more like it, huh?" he said, eyes twinkling. "I hope I didn't alarm you, Momo. It was just a little joke of mine. But now, my girl, come with me. You've a long journey behind you, and I'm sure you'd enjoy a hearty breakfast." He took her by the hand and led her off into the clock forest, with the tortoise following at their heels. After twisting and turning like a maze, the path eventually came out in a small room whose walls consisted of gigantic grandfather clocks. In one corner stood a bow-legged table, and beside it a dainty little sofa and some matching armchairs. Here, as elsewhere, everything was bathed in the golden glow of a myriad motionless candle flames. Set out on the table were a pot-bellied jug and 2 small cups, together with plates, spoons and knives, all of solid gleaming gold. There were also 2 little dishes, one containing golden yellow butter, the other honey, like liquid gold, and a basket piled high with crusty golden brown rolls. Professor Hora filled both cups with hot chocolate from the pot-bellied jug and made a gesture of invitation. There, little Momo, please tuck in. Momo needed no second bidding. Chocolate you could drink she'd never heard of before. As for rolls spread with butter and honey, they were a rare delicacy, and these rolls tasted more delicious than any she'd eaten in her life. Completely wrapped up in her wonderful breakfast, she feasted on it with her cheeks bulging and her mind devoid of every other thought. Although she hadn't slept a wink all night long, the food banished her weariness and made her feel fresh and lively. The more she ate, the better it tasted. She felt as if she could have gone on eating like this for days on end. Professor Hora, who watched her benevolently, was tactful enough not to cut short her enjoyment too soon by engaging in conversation. He realized that his guest had years of hunger to make up for. Perhaps this was why, while watching her, he gradually looked older and older until he became a white-haired old gentleman again. When he noticed that Momo wasn't too handy with a knife, he spread the rolls for her and put them on her plate. He himself ate little, just enough to keep her company. At last, even Momo could eat no longer. She drank up her chocolate, studying her host over the rim of the golden cup and wondering who or what he could possibly be. He was no ordinary person, that much was obvious, but all she really knew about him so far was his name. She put her cup down and cleared her throat. "Why did you send the tortoise to fetch me?" "To protect you from the men in grey," Professor Hora replied gravely. "They are searching for you everywhere, and you're only safe from them here with me." Momo looked startled. "You mean they want to hurt me?" "Yes, my child," the professor sighed, "in a manner of speaking. But why?" "Because they're afraid of you. Because no one could have done them greater harm." "I haven't done anything to them," Momo protested. "Oh yes, you have. You not only persuaded one of them to betray himself, you told your friends about him. What's more, you and your friends tried to broadcast the truth about the man in grey. Isn't that enough to make you their mortal enemy?" "But we walked right through the city, the tortoise and I," Momo said. "If they were searching for me everywhere, they could easily have caught us. We weren't going fast." The tortoise had stationed herself at the professor's feet. He took her on his lap and tickled her under the chin. "Well, Cassiopeia," he said with a smile, "what's your opinion? Could they have caught you?" The word "never" appeared like lightning on Cassiopeia's shell, and the letters flickered so merrily that Momo almost thought she detected a dry little chuckle. "The thing is," said the professor, "Cassiopeia can see into the future. Not far, just half an hour or thereabouts, but still." "Correction," flashed the shell. "Pardon me," said the professor. "I should have said half an hour precisely. She knows for certain what will happen in the next 30 minutes. Like whether or not she's going to bump into the grey man, for instance." "My goodness," exclaimed Momo, "how useful! So if she knew in advance she'd meet the man in grey at such and such a spot, would she simply take a different route?" No, Professor Hora replied. I'm afraid it's not as easy as that. She can't undo anything she knows in advance because she knows what is actually going to happen. If she knew she was going to meet the men in grey at a certain spot, she would meet them there. She'd be powerless to prevent it. Momo's face fell. I don't understand, she said. In that case, there's no advantage in knowing anything in advance after all. There is sometimes, said the professor. In your case, for example, she knew you were going to take a certain road and not meet any men in grey. That was an advantage, wasn't it? Momo didn't reply. Her thoughts were as tangled as a skein of wool. But to return to you and your friends, the professor went on, I must congratulate you. Your posters and placards were most impressive. You mean you read them? Momo asked delightedly. Every last word, the professor assured her. Nobody else did, from the look of it, said Momo. The professor nodded sympathetically. I'm afraid not. The men in grey saw to that. Do you know them well? Momo asked. He nodded again and sighed. As well as they know me, he said. Momo didn't know what to make of this reply. Do you often go to see them? No, never. I never set foot outside this house. What about the men in grey? Do they ever come here? The professor smiled. Never fear, Momo. They can't get in. They couldn't even if they knew the way to Never Lane, which they don't. Momo thought a while. Though reassured by Professor Hora's remarks, she was eager to learn more about him. How do you come to know all this? She asked. I mean, about our posters and the men in grey. I keep a constant watch on them and everything connected with them, the professor told her. So I've naturally been watching you and your friends as well. I thought you said you never left the house. I have no need to, said the professor, rapidly growing younger again as he spoke. Thanks to my omnivision glasses. He took off his little gold-rimmed spectacles and held them out. Would you care to try them? Momo put them on. I can't make out anything at all, she said, screwing up her eyes blinking. All she could see was a whirl of colors, lights and shadows. It made her feel positively dizzy. Yes, she heard the professor say, it's always the same to begin with. Seeing through omnivision glasses isn't as easy as all that. You will soon get used to them though. He stood behind Momo's chair and gently adjusted the position of the frame. At once, everything sprang into focus. The first thing Momo saw was the man in grey and their 3 limousines on the edge of the district where the strange white buildings began. They were in the process of pushing their cars backwards. Then, looking further afield, she saw more grey figures in the city streets. They were talking and gesticulating excitedly as though passing on information of some kind. It's you they're talking about, Professor Hora explained. They can't understand how you managed to escape. Why are they all so grey in the face? Momo asked, still watching them. Because they feed on dead matter, the professor told her. They live in people's time, as you know, but time dies, literally dies, once it has been wrested away from its rightful owners. All human beings have their own share of time, but it survives only for as long as it really belongs to them. So the men in grey aren't human? No, their human appearance is only a disguise. What are they then? Strictly speaking, they are nothing. So where do they come from? They exist only because people give them the opportunity to do so. Naturally, they seized that opportunity. Now that people are giving them a chance to rule their lives, they are naturally taking advantage of that too. What would happen if they couldn't steal any more time? They'd disappear into thin air, which is where they come from. Professor Hora took his glasses back and pocketed them. Unfortunately, he continued after a pause, they already have plenty of human accomplices. That's the worst part. Well, nobody's going to steal any of my time, Momo said stoutly. I should hope so, said the professor. From one moment to the next, he looked like an old man again. Come along, Momo, I want to show you my collection. Taking her by the hand, he led her back into the great hall, where he showed her all sorts of timepieces and made them chime for her. Explained the workings of his sidereal clocks, and gradually, under the influence of his little visitor's obvious delight in all these marvels, grew younger again. Tell me, he said as they walked on, do you like riddles? Oh yes, very much, Momo said eagerly. Do you know any? Yes, the professor said, smiling at her. I know a real teaser. Very few people can solve it. All the better, Momo said. I'll make a special note of it so I can try it out on my friends. The professor's smile broadened. I can't wait to see if you can solve it. Listen carefully. All dwelling in one house are strange brothers three, as unlike as any three brothers could be. Yet try as you may to tell brother from brother, you will find that the trio resemble each other. The first isn't there, though he'll come beyond doubt. The second's departed, so he's not about. The third, and the smallest, is right on the spot, and manage without him the others could not. Yet the third is a factor with which to be reckoned, because the first brother turns into the second. You cannot stand back and observe number three, for one of the others is all you will see. So tell me, my child, are the three of them one? Or are there but two? Or could there be none? Just name them, and you will at once realize that each rules a kingdom of infinite size. They rule it together, and are it as well, in that they are alike. So, where do they dwell? Professor Hora gave Momo an encouraging nod. Thanks to her excellent memory, she was able to repeat the whole rhyme word for word. She did so, slowly and carefully, then sighed. Phew, she said. That's a really hard one. I have no idea what the answer could be. I don't even know where to start. Just try, said the professor. Momo recited the riddle again under her breath. Finally, she shook her head. It's no use, she said. The tortoise, which had now rejoined them and was seated at the professor's feet, had been watching Momo intently. Well, Cassiopeia, said the professor, you know everything half an hour in advance. Will Momo solve the riddle or won't she? Cassiopeia's shell lit up. She will, it spelled out. You see, the professor said, turning to Momo, you are going to solve it. Cassiopeia has never been wrong yet. Momo knit her brow and racked her brains once more. Who were these three brothers that all lived in the same house? They obviously weren't brothers in the usual sense. In riddles, brothers always meant grains of sand or teeth or like similar things at all events. But these three things somehow turned into each other. What sort of things could do that? Looking around in search of inspiration, Momo caught sight of the candles with their motionless flames. Fire turned wax into light. Yes, they were three brothers. But that couldn't be the answer because they were all there at the same time. And two of them weren't supposed to be. What about blossom, fruit, and seed? Could the answer be something of that kind? The more Momo debated this possibility, the more promising it seemed. The seed was the smallest of the three. It was there when the other two were not. And the other two couldn't exist without it. But no, that wouldn't do either. A seed was perfectly visible, and the riddle said that anyone looking at the smallest of the three brothers always saw one of the other two. Momo's thoughts flitted hither and thither. She simply couldn't find a clue that led anywhere. Still, Cassiopeia had predicted that she would solve the riddle, so she slowly recited it to herself for a third time. When she came to the line, "The first isn't there, though he'll come beyond doubt," she saw Cassiopeia give her a wink. The words, "What I know," lit up on her shell, but only for a split second. Professor Hora smiled. "No helping, Cassiopeia," he said, though he hadn't been looking in her direction. "Momo can work it out all by herself." Momo, who had seen the words, began to ponder their meaning. What was it that Cassiopeia knew? She knew the riddle would be solved, but that was no help. So what else did Cassiopeia know? She always knew what was going to happen. She knew... "The future!" cried Momo. "The first isn't there, though he'll come beyond doubt. That's the future." Professor Hora nodded. "The second's departed," Momo went on, "so he's not about. That must be the past." The professor beamed at her and nodded again. "Now comes the hard part," Momo said thoughtfully. "What can be the third brother? He's the smallest of the three, but the other two can't manage without him. And he's the only one at home." After another pause for thought, she gave a sudden exclamation. "Of course! It's now, this very moment. The past consists of moments gone by and the future of moments to come. So neither of them could exist without the present. That's it." Her cheeks were glowing with excitement now. "But what does the next bit mean? Yet the third is a factor with which to be reckoned, because the first brother turns into the second." "I suppose it means that the present exists only because the future turns into the past." She looked at Professor Hora with dawning amazement. "Yes, it's true. I had never looked at it like that before. If it is true, though, there's really no such thing as the present. Only past and future. Take this moment, for instance. By the time I talk about it, it's already in the past. You cannot stand back and observe number 3, for one of the others is all you will see." I understand what that means now. I understand the rest too, because you could be forgiven for thinking there was only one brother, the present I mean, or only the past or the future, or none of them at all, because each of them exists only when the others do. Golly, it's enough to make your head spin. "But the riddle isn't finished yet," said the professor. "What's this kingdom the brothers all rule together? The one they themselves are?" Momo looked baffled. What could it be? What did past, present and future amount to, all lumped together? She gazed around the great hall, with its thousands upon thousands of clocks. Suddenly her face lit up. "Time!" she cried, clapping her hands and skipping of joy. "That's what it is, time! And the house the brothers lived in, what would that be?" The world, I suppose, Momo replied. Bravo, said the professor, clapping in his turn. I congratulate you, my girl. You're really good at solving riddles. I'm delighted. Me too, said Momo, secretly wondering why he should be quite so pleased that she'd solved this riddle. He showed her many other rare and interesting things as they resumed their tour of the clock-filled hall, but the riddle continued to occupy her thoughts. Tell me, she said eventually, what exactly is time? You have just found that out for yourself, the professor replied. No, she said, I mean time itself, it exists, so it must be something. What is it really? The professor smiled. It would be nice if you worked out your own answer to that question too. Momo pondered for a long time. It exists, she mused. That much I know, but you can't touch or hold it. Could it be something like perfume? Then again, it's always passing by, so it must come from somewhere. Perhaps it's like the wind. No, wait. Perhaps it's a kind of music you just don't hear because it's always there. She paused, then added, though I have heard it sometimes, I think, very faintly. The professor nodded. I know. That's why I was able to summon you here. But there must be more to it than that, said Momo, still pursuing her train of thought. The music comes from far off, but I seem to hear it deep inside me. Perhaps time works that way too. She broke off, bewildered. I mean, she said, like the wind making waves in the sea. She shrugged and shook her head. I expect I'm talking nonsense. Not at all, said the professor. I think you put it very prettily indeed. That's why I'm going to let you into a secret. If you want to know, all the time in the world comes from here, from Nowhere House, Never Lane. Momo gazed at him in awe. I see, she said softly. You mean you make it yourself? The professor smiled again. No, my child, I'm merely its custodian. All human beings have their allotted span of time. My task is to see that it reaches them. In that case, said Momo, why not simply arrange things so they don't have any more of it stolen by the time thieves? I can't, the professor told her. What people do with their time is their own business. They must guard it themselves. I can only distribute it. Momo looked around the great hall. Is that why you keep all these clocks? One for every person in the world? No, Momo, these clocks are just a hobby of mine. They are imperfect copies of something that everyone carries inside him. Just as people have eyes to see light with, and ears to hear sound with, so they have hearts for the appreciation of time. And all the time they fail to appreciate is as wasted on them as the colors of the rainbow are wasted on a blind person or the nightingale's song on a deaf one. Some hearts are unappreciative of time, I fear, though they beat like all the rest. What will happen when my heart stops beating? Momo asked. When that moment comes, said the professor, time will stop for you as well. Or rather, you will retrace your steps through time. Through all these days and nights, months and years of your life, until you go out through the great round silver gate you entered by. What will I find on the other side? The home of the music you've sometimes faintly heard in the distance, but by then you will be part of it. You yourself will be a note in its mighty harmonies. Professor Hora looked at Momo searchingly. But I don't suppose that makes much sense to you, does it? Yes, said Momo, I think so. Then, recalling her strange progress along Never Lane and the way she'd lived through everything in reverse, she asked, Are you death? The professor smiled. If people knew the nature of death, he said after a moment's silence, they would cease to be afraid of it. And if they ceased to be afraid of it, no one could rob them of their time anymore. Why not tell them then? Momo suggested. I already do, said the professor. I tell them the meaning of death with every hour I send them. But they refuse to listen. They'd sooner heed those who frighten them. That's another riddle in itself. I'm not frightened, said Momo. Professor Hora nodded slowly. He gave her another searching stare. Then he said, Would you like to see where time comes from? Yes, she whispered. I will take you there, said the professor, but only if you promise not to talk or ask questions. Is that understood? Momo nodded. Professor Hora stooped and picked her up. All at once, he seemed immensely tall and inexpressibly old, but not as a man grows old, more in the manner of an ancient tree or primeval crag. Clasping Momo with one arm, he covered her eyes with his other hand, so gently that it felt as if snowflakes were landing on her cheeks like icy thistledown. Momo sensed that he was striding down a long, dark tunnel, but she felt quite safe and utterly unafraid. At first, she thought she could hear her own heartbeats, but then she became more and more convinced that they were really the echoes of the professor's footsteps. After what seemed a very long way, he put Momo down. His face was close to hers when he removed his hand from her eyes. He gave her a meaningful look and put a finger to his lips. Then he straightened up and stepped back. Everything was bathed in a sort of golden twilight. When her eyes became accustomed to it, Momo saw that she was standing beneath a mighty dome as big as the vault of heaven itself, or so it seemed to her, and that the whole of this dome was made of the purest gold. High overhead, in the very center of the dome, was a circular opening through which a shaft of light fell straight on to an equally circular lake whose dark, smooth waters resembled a jet-black mirror. Just above the surface, glittering in the shaft of light with the brilliance of a star, something was slowly and majestically moving back and forth. Momo saw that it was a gigantic pendulum, but one with no visible means of support. Apparently weightless, it soared and swooped above the mirror-smooth water with bird-like ease. As the glittering pendulum slowly neared the edge of the lake, an enormous water lily bud emerged from its dark depths. The closer the pendulum came, the wider it opened, until at last it lay full-blown on the surface. Momo had never seen so exquisite a flower. It was composed of all the colors in the spectrum, brilliant colors, such as Momo had never dreamed of. While the pendulum hovered above it, she became so absorbed in the spectacle that she forgot everything else. The scent alone seemed something she had always craved without knowing what it was. But then, very slowly, the pendulum swung back, and as it did so, Momo saw to her dismay that the glorious flower was beginning to wilt. Petal after petal dropped off and sank into the blackness below. To Momo, it was as if something unutterly dear to her were vanishing beyond recall. By the time the pendulum reached the center of the lake, the flower had completely disintegrated. At that moment, however, a new bud arose near the opposite shore, and as the pendulum drew nearer, Momo saw that an even lovelier blossom was beginning to unfold. She walked around the lake to inspect it more closely. This new flower was altogether different from its predecessor. Momo had never seen such colors before, but these colors seemed richer and more exquisite by far. The petals too gave off a different and far more delicious scent, and the longer Momo studied them, the more marvelous in every detail she found them. But again the glittering pendulum swung back, and as it did so, the glorious blossom withered and sank, petal by petal, into the dark and unfathomable depths of the lake. Slowly, very slowly, the pendulum proceeded on its way, but not to exactly the same place as before. This time it checked its swing a little way further along the shore, and there, one pace from where it had previously paused, another bud arose and unfolded. To Momo, this seemed the loveliest lily of all, the flower of flowers, a positive miracle. She could have wept aloud when this perfect blossom too began to fade and subside into the depths. But she remembered her promise to Professor Ora and uttered no sound. Meanwhile, the pendulum had returned to the opposite shore, another pace further along, and a fresh bud broke the glassy surface. As time went by, it dawned on Momo that each new blossom differed entirely from those that had gone before, and that it always seemed the most beautiful of all. She wandered around the lake, watching flower after flower unfold and die. Although she felt she would never tire of this spectacle, she gradually became aware of another marvel, one that had escaped her until now. She could not only see the shaft of light that streamed down from the center of the dome, she could hear it as well. At first it reminded her of wind whistling in distant treetops, but the sound swelled until it resembled the roar of a waterfall or the thunder of waves breaking on a rocky shore. More and more clearly, Momo perceived that this mighty sound consisted of innumerable notes whose constant changes of pitch were forever weaving different harmonies. It was music, yet it was also something else. All at once she recognized it as the faraway music she had sometimes faintly heard while listening to the silence of a starry night. But now, as the sound became even clearer and more glorious, she sensed that it was the resonant shaft of light that summoned each bud from the dark depths of the lake and fashioned it into a flower of unique and inimitable beauty. The longer she listened, the more clearly she could make out individual voices. Not human voices, but notes such as might have been given forth by gold and silver and every other precious metal in existence. And then, beyond them, as it were, voices of quite another kind made themselves heard, infinitely remote yet indescribably powerful. As they gained strength, Momo began to distinguish words uttered in a language she had never heard before but could nonetheless understand. The sun and moon and planets and stars were telling her their own true names, and their names signified what they did and how they all combined to make each hourly flower and fade in return. Suddenly, Momo realized that all these words were directed at her. From where she stood to the most distant star in space, the entire universe was focused upon her, like a single face of unimaginable size, looking at her and talking to her. What overcame her then was something more than fear. A moment later, she caught sight of Professor Hora silently beckoning to her. She ran to him and buried her face in his chest. Taking her in his arms, he put one hand over her eyes, as before, light as thistledown, and carried her back along the endless tunnel. Again, all seemed dark, but again she felt snug and secure. Once they were back in the little clock-lined room, he laid her down on the sofa. "Professor Hora," Momo whispered, "I never knew that everyone's time was so." She strove to find the right word, but in vain. "So big," she said eventually. "What you've just seen and heard wasn't everyone's time," the professor replied. "It was only your own. There's a place like the one you visited in every living soul, but only those who let me take them there can reach it. Nor can it be seen with ordinary eyes. So, where was I?" "In the depths of your own heart," said the professor, gently stroking her tousled hair. "Professor Hora," she whispered again, "may I bring my friends to see you too?" "No," he said, "not yet. That isn't possible." "How long can I stay with you then?" "Until you feel it's time to rejoin your friends, my child. But may I tell them what the stars were saying?" "You may, but you won't be able to." "Why not?" "Because before you can, the words must take root inside you." "But I want to tell them, all of them. I want to sing them what the voices sing. Then everything would come right again, I think." "If that's what you really want, Momo, you must learn to wait." "I don't mind waiting. I mean, wait like a seed that must slumber in the earth before it can sprout. That's how long the words will take to grow up inside you. Is that what you want?" "Yes," she whispered. "Then sleep," said the Professor Hora, gently passing his hand across her eyes. "Sleep." And Momo heaved a deep, contented sigh and fell asleep.